Good afternoon, everyone, and Happy New Year. Welcome to today's webinar briefing by the Jerusalem Press Club. I'm Talia Deco. January 3rd marks exactly 1 year since the United States assassinated Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps Commander Qasem Soleimani in what many in the region feared would escalate into a regional war. Over the weekend, the U.S. scaled back its presence in the Middle East, sending home its aircraft carrier. The move follows heightened tensions in the Middle East between Washington and Tehran as leaders continue to flex their muscles in scenes reminiscent of the past few years. In Israel, we continue to follow these events closely, especially following the government's alleged assassination of Iran's top nuclear scientist. Joining JPC today is Major General retired Giora Eiland, former head of Israel's National Security Council, and today a top consultant for the nation's defense industry. Thank you for being with us today, General Eiland.
Thank you. My pleasure.
It seems as though the escalation we feared is not in immediate sight. How likely is it that Iran will decide to retaliate when we least expect it?
Well, I don't think that we should expect an immediate escalation because countries don't begin a war just because they want to take a revenge. And certainly they don't want to do it on a specific date only because this date symbolizes something. This is not a serious approach. And the Iranians are not only serious and calculated, but very patient. And I don't think that they have any interest today to resume any large-scale confrontation with anyone, especially not with the United States, 2 weeks before the transition of the presidency. So I don't think that anything dramatic should happen in the next few days or hours, just because we happen to be on the 3rd of January. However, Iran feels that at some point they will have to retaliate, if not against the United States, at least against Israel or against Israeli interests. And it could be here in the Middle East, it could be elsewhere. Many times they prefer to operate elsewhere, which could be in South America or in any other place where they can find, let's say, less dependent Israeli or even Jewish target as they used to do in the past. And since they have a lot of proxies all around the world, especially in the Middle East, but not only, then they do not necessarily have to take any responsibility and to take the risk to begin a real confrontation. But I assume that even if they choose to do something much more calculated and moderate, they would probably prefer to do it after Biden takes over. They know that sometimes Trump is not predictable and they don't want to take any unnecessary risk. It is even more than that. Iran is still under real pressure. All the ordinary, I would say, explanations about the effects of the economic sanctions, the political sanctions, the coronavirus and its impact on the internal situation in Iran. And of course, the unsuccessful attempts that they try to increase their influence in Syria, in Iraq, and some other places. So they have to be very careful. And especially they have to be very careful not to risk the very successful achievements so far. And this is Lebanon. Actually, the state of Lebanon is controlled by Iran because Lebanon is a real facade, it's not a real state. It is only a legend state. It is fully controlled by Hezbollah, and Hezbollah is fully controlled by Iran. So Iran is actually controlling Lebanon, and they don't want to take any unnecessary risk today. And when we try to assess the real strategy is based on the very explicit announcement of Biden that he would try to resume the negotiation and try to resume to return to the previous agreement. He says that with certain modifications, the Iranians said, no, we will accept only the very, very exact agreement as was achieved 5 years ago. But they certainly want to re-engage with the Americans based on the mutual interest of both sides, Biden and the Iranians themselves, to return to the original deal. and there is no reason why they would try to risk it. So the bottom line is that I do not expect any real escalation in the Middle East. By the way, both sides, despite certain very bold announcements, are very careful not to take actions that might be perceived as provocation. Even the Americans send their Nimitz aircraft carrier a little bit backward just in order to reduce the tension. So I don't think that something dramatic might occur in the next few weeks or even months. But, and here is the big but, usually a real successful attack, even if it is quite tactical, happens in a surprise. This is the whole idea why surprises are successful, because they happen to occur when no one predicted that it would happen. We could remember so many examples in the history, if you want, Pearl Harbor and many others. It happened when someone does not expect that it would happen. So maybe I can present a possible scenario that some early morning, it could be even Saturday morning in Israel, in a cloudy day, Israel or Israeli targets might be attacked simultaneously by cruise missiles from Iraq, Iranian cruise missiles from other places, including possibly Yemen, and ballistic missiles from Hezbollah. It will be done not in mass or in a larger scale, but it could be very painful from the Israeli point of view. And if we fail to prevent this attack and we will suffer for significant damage, then Israel will have to think very hard what should be done. So something like this might happen every day. And from the military point of view, I believe that the level of readiness is a proper one. But from the strategic point of view, I don't think that we can expect any real escalation in the foreseeable future.
All right, thank you for that. Israel delivered a second Iron Dome battery over the weekend to the US Army in an effort to assist in ballistic and air defense. Where can you speculate the two Iron Domes will be deployed, against whom?
We have to understand, if we want to give a little bit more professional or technical explanation about the threats vis-a-vis the ability to defend, then Israel has basically, I would say, three different kind of solutions against any kind of missiles that might attack us. The first one is the lower level of Iron Dome, which found to be quite effective, not only against short-range missiles, but even against, let's say, medium-range missiles. We have the second level, I don't know what is the exact name in English, Samim we call it in Hebrew, which can intercept not only ballistic missiles, and this is the real news, it found to be very effective against cruise missiles. And we have to understand that cruise missiles are always more dangerous because they fly in very low altitude. They can maneuver, they can come by surprise from different directions. That's exactly, by the way, what the Iranians did to Saudi Arabia about a year and a half ago when they attacked by surprise some of the oil facilities in Saudi Arabia, and they actually caused a very significant damage. But fortunately, this second Israeli layer of protection can very well confront with the cruise missile. And besides that, we have a specific missiles that can protect specific sites. It is the Barak 8 missiles. We equip our ships with Barak 8 missiles, but it can be also on the ground. If you want to protect a very important strategic site, you can put this kind of missiles that can today confront any kind of missile. And we have to also to understand that even those cruise missiles, despite their abilities, can be very easily taken by aircrafts that can use air-to-air missiles. The famous American missile, the AMRAAM missile. So if you have some kind of early warning and you know that the enemy is planning to do something, and you can have some aircrafts in the air with this kind of armor missiles, then you can cope with it. In other words, contrary to Saudi Arabia, contrary probably to any other country in the world, Israel is quite well defended. And this is probably one of the reasons why Iran is not very keen to try to do something, because they have to make sure that it is going to be successful and not a failure, as they failed sometimes in the past.
Okay, thank you. Going back to Israel specifically, do you think that during the Biden administration, Israel will continue its current policy of attacks in Syria against Iranian targets, or even larger projects like taking out senior scientists, and perhaps even more intense missions like the nuclear archives mission of a few years ago?
I would say that the Israeli policy, as far as I can understand it today, is based on four main principles. Number one, in regard to Lebanon, we are not going to resume anything, and as long as we manage to deter Hezbollah, it is, at least for the time being, good enough. It might, by the way, change, and Israel might consider proactive action if and when we believe that Hezbollah manages to acquire a critical mass of precise missiles. This is the real intent of Hezbollah. Nasrallah just made a very provocative announcement a few days ago about their ability to continue and to produce precise missiles. And if we feel that we fail to stop this kind of process, Israel might consider a proactive actions against Hezbollah in Lebanon. But for the time being, the policy is, as I said, very defensive. And as long as we manage to deter the other side, we will do nothing. Syria is different matter, because we do understand that Iran is trying to create in Syria what we can call in Israel as Hezbollah 2, which means a militia loyal to Iran, very well equipped, that might open fire against Israel despite the decision of the official government of Syria. So the Iranians are trying to take advantage of the weakness of the regime in Iran. And here the Israeli policy is very different. Here we are taking continuous proactive actions, and I believe that we attacked targets in Syria, probably hundreds in the past few years. Some of them have been announced, some of them are taken in much more confidential way. But this is a very proactive actions, and I don't think that the Americans will be against it. So there is no reason to think that the American administration, the new one, might be against it. The third one is vis-a-vis Iran itself. Again, we are focusing mainly on one matter, which means to try to prevent Iran from producing nuclear weapon. And it is a combined effort. There is a lot of diplomatic efforts, a lot of intelligence efforts, a lot of technical activities, and some of them might include also certain targets of specific individuals, although Israel never took responsibility for something like this. So this is the number three. And the number four is to try to persuade not only the previous American administration, but also Biden administration that a deal with Iran might be a good idea, but only as long as this deal is going to be a good deal and not very similar to the previous one. And this is probably the most difficult task that the Israeli government, whoever is the Israeli government, might face during the forthcoming years of Biden administration. And I think this is the main challenge, which is much more political rather than military.
Understood. Just one last question about Iran specifically before we move on to a few other things. You mentioned Lebanon continuing to be a proxy state of the Islamic Republic. The ongoing, or not ongoing, the currently stalled negotiations, maritime negotiations between Lebanon and Israel, is that something that can happen while Iran still controls Lebanon?
This is a great question, because the state of Lebanon as far as this term means something, or the people of Lebanon have all the good reasons why to reach such an agreement with Israel that will lead to demarcation of the maritime border between the two countries, which is still vague, and it remained vague after the Israeli unilateral withdrawal from Lebanon 20 years ago. And for the first time after many, many years, the government of Lebanon is actually forced or under huge pressure of the Europeans, and especially by the United States, to reach the negotiations with Israel, because the real dispute is very limited. I mean, from the, let's say, from the real, let's say, interest of both sides, it is quite easy to reach an agreement. And if such an agreement is reached, it means that both countries will be able to explore and to find much more gas reserves in this part of the Mediterranean Sea, and both countries can benefit from it. And this is something that there is no reason why it would not happen. So far, it did not happen because Hezbollah was against it, and Hezbollah was against it not only because it might be perceived as an implicit recognition of Lebanon in Israel, or an implicit political agreement with Israel, but Hezbollah was against it because of much more important reason, and this is something that has to be understood. Hezbollah is always looking, or will always be looking, for a good excuse to open fire against Israel if they believe that this is the right time. But Hezbollah is not Al-Qaeda. It is not only a terrorist organization. It is a political movement that depends very much on the internal legitimacy in Lebanon. And they understand that they cannot resume a war against Israel, something that will bring to devastation of Lebanon, because if they do something like this, then all the Lebanese will blame them why we had to suffer so much for some kind of interest, which are actually not a Lebanese interest, it is Iranian interest. So Nasrallah had to find some more national excuse why to open fire against Israel. And in the past 3 or 4 years, he repeatedly said that Israel is stealing the fortune of Lebanon. Israel is stealing the gas of Lebanon. Israel is provoking the sovereignty of Lebanon in the sea, and he's doing it because this is the perfect excuse that can give him the explanation why it is time to open fire against Israel. And if this matter is settled between the countries, it means that Hezbollah will lose the ultimate excuse that he wants to keep it alive. Now, the fact that the government of Lebanon was ready to resume negotiation, it shows that Hezbollah is under certain pressure. But the fact that such an agreement has not been reached so far, and I don't foresee that it will reach, it means that behind the scenes, Hezbollah is much more influenced and much more influential, and it can still force the delegation of the state of Lebanon not to reach an agreement, because such an agreement does not serve the real interest of Hezbollah, which are the interests of Iran.
Understood. Another question about perhaps on reconciliation in the region. Talks of Turkey and Israel resolving their conflict, of course, since the Marmara incident. Are rumors that Erdogan might reach out to Israel true? Could we see a resumption of ties between the two countries?
No, I don't think that Erdogan is looking for any resumption of dialogue with Israel. His policy is very anti-Israeli one. It is based on a lot of ideology, even emotional considerations, personal ego, many things that I don't think that a real trust can be created between the two countries as long as this is the regime in Turkey. But he has other interests, and he is trying to demark we spoke about the maritime border between countries, and he wants to change the situation in the eastern part of the Mediterranean Sea. Now, everyone who will look at the map will see that very, very close to the land of Turkey, in the range of 5 miles or even less, there are a lot of islands that belong to Greece. This is part of the situation that emerged after the First World War more than a century ago. And for the Turks, this is something that they cannot really tolerate whenever they look west and they see Greek islands in a range which is so close. Now, according to the conventional way to demark borders between the maritime border between countries, these islands are actually Greek islands. So the border between Turkey and Greece in the sea should be more or less in the middle between the mainland and these Greek islands, which as far as Erdogan is concerned, this is a real Turkish territory. So he wants to change it. It's quite complex to explain it, but he believes that if he manages to reach an agreement, a bilateral agreement between Israel and Turkey about the maritime border between these two countries, it might enable him to expand this border to other territories and to reach something that for him it is by far much more important than to have good relations with Israel. So it is a kind of a trick or kind of a trap, and I believe and hope that the government of Israel will not fall and will not listen to these sweetie words that he is trying to use suddenly in the past few weeks.
Very interesting, and also how our own election might impact the decisions that would be made. Just a question regarding actual deals that have been made over the last few months. If you will, Israel's deal with the UAE obviously brought some sort of agreement on the sale of F-35s. We also saw the US and Saudi Arabia reaching a huge arms deal. Do you see these actions as changing the balance of powers within the region? Is Israel's qualitative military edge at risk at the end of the day?
Well, I hope that the answer is no. I mean, certainly Israel was not very happy to agree that the UAE will get the most advanced jet fighters, the F-35. It is not fully consistent with our, let's say, traditional approach. And I think this is a kind of concessions that we had to make in order to get something that we believe which is more important. And the more important is not only to have a peace agreement with this country, with Abu Dhabi and other countries that came later, Bahrain, Morocco, to a certain extent, Sudan, and maybe others, which are very important. But there is another matter that, at least for Netanyahu, is very important, and this is to break, I would say, the Arab consensus behind the Palestinian cause. And this is something that maybe should be explained in two other words. In 2002, the Arab League accepted officially what was known as the Saudi Initiative, that said that any normalization with Israel, and certainly political relations with Israel, will depend on the two moves. First, that Israel will fully withdraw from the West Bank and from the Golan Heights. And second, that Israel will sign an agreement with the Palestinians and with Syria according to the expectations of both the Palestinians and the Syrians. And only after these two steps are made, then there should be a normalization between Israel and the rest of the Arab world. And this is traditionally, in the past 18 years, was the policy of these all Arab countries. Not only the political or not only the diplomatic relations were not possible, but even small gesture vis-a-vis Israel was not allowed. For instance, a few years ago, President Obama visited Saudi Arabia, and he wanted to bring some, I would say, some small present to Israel, and tried to speak to the king there, tried to say, why won't you allow the Israeli airlines to use the airspace of Saudi Arabia to fly to the east? This is not a political move, it is much more an economic gesture. Please give me this element so I can bring the Israelis and can persuade them to take some, let's say, building confidence measures vis-a-vis the Palestinians. And the King of Saudi Arabia said, no, he said, we are committed to the 2002 Arab League agreement or initiative or decision. And the fact that today this possible Palestinians way to actually to veto any process between Israel and any other Arab country is gone, something that caused a lot of frustration on the Palestinian side, and it is of course understandable. But from the Israeli point of view, this is a very important achievement. And the bottom line, even if we have to make some concessions, including in the military sphere, I think that it was a smart move.
Okay, I did promise that we would finish questions about Iran, but we've had a few more come in naturally. And because we're running out of time, I'm going to combine a few of them. So bear with me. This is a direct quote from a reporter, General Eiland. 14 years ago, in an interview with the Jerusalem Post, you said that Iran would get a nuclear bomb regardless of what Israel or the world powers do to deter it. Do you still think so? And also, I'm attaching a follow-up question. What do you think of the most recent announcement that they will enrich uranium to 20%? I know that there are many of these announcements, but the most recent one talks about 20%.
The first question, the answer is yes. I mean, I'm quite pleased that the Iranians find much more difficulties than what we expected that they would have and what they expected that they would have. And as far as we know today, beginning of 2021, they do not have a nuclear bomb, although they have actually all the access and all the potential to have it if they make a decision to try to get it in a period of less than 6 months or less than a year if we want to be more careful. So, so in the end of the day, this is a real clear Iranian ambitions, by the way, which I must agree, it is understandable. And I'm telling you that I don't speak with Iranian, but I used to speak with a lot of other people who did speak with Iranian, and they quoted Iranian, not of course officially, that said that we, Iran, actually have 4 good reasons why we actually need the nuclear weapons and why this is the most important national interest. And they said, number 1, we were attacked 20 years ago by Iraq because we were defenseless, and Saddam Hussein could do whatever he wanted, and we suffered a lot. Everybody understands that if we had a nuclear weapon, no one would dare to do something similar to us. So we really need a nuclear weapon for self-defense, and we have the ultimate evidence why such a weapon is so essential to us. Number 2, they said everybody in the world, especially the Americans, are trying to cause a regime change in Iran, and they can mess with us just because we are defenseless, because we cannot retaliate. And it is clear that if we have nuclear weapon, no one will try to do something like this to us. Number 3, they said, we, Iran, we cannot tolerate the double standard that we can see all around the world, because other similar countries like us, like India and Pakistan, which are similar in size, importance of interest, size of population, the importance of history, etc. They are allowed to have nuclear weapons. Why shouldn't we have? And the 4th explanation, which is quite surprising one, if you want to create or cause us to smile, and said everybody has a nuclear weapons. All kind of Catholics, all 3 different kind of Christians have nuclear weapons. The Hindus have nuclear weapons. The Buddhists in China have nuclear weapon. The Muslim Sunnis have nuclear weapon in Pakistan. The Jews have nuclear weapons. Why the Shias are the only ones who do not deserve to have nuclear weapon? So time has come also a Shia country will have a nuclear weapon like the Christians, the Hindus, the Buddhists, the Jews, and the Sunnis. And this is, if you want, some kind of religious explanation, but they do believe that this is something that they cannot tolerate the fact that the world look at them as an inferior people because they are Shias. So this is another symbol of being part of the most advanced countries in the world. So the Iranian interest to get nuclear weapon is clear. They will be persistent and consistent, and it is only a matter of how much counter pressure will be used by others in order to prevent it. But in the end of the day, I'm afraid that they might have it. The second, more specific questions about the enrichment from 4% to 20%. This is one of the measures that the calculated measures that the Iranian take. By the way, not now. They began to do it after President Trump withdrew from the agreement. And they said, well, we had an agreement. We gave 100%, we got 100%. From the moment that the Americans withdrew, it means that some of the compensation was taken out of us. So if some of the compensation was taken from us, there is no reason that we will not take certain measure in order not to pay the price that we were ready to pay for the original agreement. And today they accelerate very carefully this process in order to create some pressure on the United States in order to be in a better position when the dialogue begins, as they believe, in a matter of few months.
Understood. Just one last question, because this is something that just came in. Do you believe that Saudi Arabia would actually let Israel, or maybe other Persian Gulf countries, would let Israel use their airspace in the event of some sort of confrontation between Jerusalem and Tehran?
I'm not sure. I think that the Saudis are extremely careful. I think that they try to avoid any tension as far as they can. As I already mentioned, they were attacked about a year and a half ago by Iran, and they absorbed this attack. Actually, they did very little. It is true that they make some announcements against Iran, but they continue to maintain reasonable relations with Iran. So they understand that Iran, in the end of the day, is closer to Saudi Arabia than Israel, or at least closer to the main assets of the oil fields, which are located very close to the Iranian border. And they will prefer that someone else will do the job, but will not push them to be proactively or even passively involved. So I'm not sure that the answer to this question is yes. I even believe that they will be much more determined not to let us to use their airspace in order to say we are not involved. If Israel wants to do something, it is her problem.
Understood. And while we already have you on the line, I will ask you about the current situation in Israel specifically. You've been very vocal in the way in which decision makers have handled the ongoing COVID crisis. What are your thoughts today, given the record-breaking vaccine rates in Israel on the one hand, and the growing number of positive tests on the other hand?
Well, it is a big matter, and it is very hard to explain in a few words. I think that Israel handled the whole crisis in a very poor way. One of the reasons is because we gave wrong definition to this phenomena. What we said from the beginning a year ago, well, there is a new virus in China, and it might come here, and the virus is a disease. And who should take care for disease? Doctors. So let's give the doctors the responsibility to take all the measures vis-a-vis the virus. And this was a huge mistake, because the corona is not a disease. The corona creates a national crisis. And a national crisis should be handled in a completely different way. And I think that we made terrible mistakes along the way. And this is very sad results or sad conclusion, because Israel has a very good experience and robust systems that know how to handle a national crisis like war or other crises, and we did not use them properly. But I must compliment the government of Israel, and especially the organizations, the medical organizations in Israel that handle this vaccine operation. And here we do it very successfully, by the way, because of two reasons. First, because this infrastructure in Israel is very advanced, very modern. These organizations know how to communicate with every individual in Israel online and can make all the necessary coordination, and they do it fantastically. And the second reason is because the big companies that produce the vaccine, especially Pfizer, really want to give in Israel some advantage because they know that in Israel it will be successful. So Pfizer and other companies like Moderna want that Israel will be, let's say, kind of a symbol how successful are the vaccines. So they prefer to give the Israel some kind of, I would say, advantage, or to give us much more quantities of material compared to others, because they know that here the operation will be successful, so they will be able to show such a success to other countries. So we enjoy from both elements, and we should be very satisfied at least with this method.
All right, Major General Giora Eiland, thank you for your time and even more for your patience today.
Thank you. My pleasure. Bye-bye.
The rest of you on the line, just a quick update that JPC will be hosting Mohammed Darawshe, an expert on Israeli Arab politics and society, this coming Wednesday for a conversation on the most recent developments in his community concerning both the pandemic, as well as a word on the upcoming elections here. Thank you to everyone who joined in, and thank you to my colleagues, Rachel Gziel, our coordinator, and Uri Dromi, our general director, for their contribution. Have a good day. We hope you enjoyed that briefing by the Jerusalem Press Club. If you did, like the video and hit the subscribe button to stay up to date with all of our future content.